onto a webinar reviewing the findings of a new report called Healthier Cities Through Restaurant Grading, which was written by my colleague, Katie Keith at CityHealth, and reviewed by the National Environmental Health Association, or NEHA. You'll also hear from New York City, which is a municipality we see leading in this policy area. Just a housekeeping note, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website after it is over. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we conduct our question and answer session. We will conduct it at the end of this webinar, but you can submit your question throughout at any time. You can do so easily by either clicking on the speech bubble to open the chat box and using the raise hand feature to notify us if you have an issue such as not being able to hear us or see the screen, and then we'll send you a message to resolve it. Or you can type your text into the chat box and press enter to send it. You can select to talk to just the panelists, or you can change to all panelists and attendees so everyone sees your question. Either way, please tell us your name and affiliation before asking your question. Next slide, please. Today you'll hear from 3 panelists. Katie Keith, who's Vice President of Partnerships at CityHealth, Kaylan Celestin, who's Project Specialist in Program and Partnership Development at NEHA, and Melissa Wong, who is Director of Special Projects at the Division of Environmental Health at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. A word about CityHealth. Next slide. CityHealth is an initiative of the De Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente. We work to advance a package of evidence-based policy solutions that will help millions of people live longer, better lives in vibrant, prosperous communities. Restaurant grading is one of the policies we work to advance. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Katie Keith.
Great, thanks, Liz. And welcome, thank you all for joining us today to talk about restaurant grading on a lovely Thursday afternoon. We're very excited to sort of release this brief. Our target audience here is really policymakers like yourselves who are interested in taking a look at a restaurant grading program and trying to take some of the lessons learned that we've collected in the brief. So the brief itself is based on sort of structured interviews with 17 folks all across the country. We talked to local and state officials, to local and state, restaurant industry representatives, and then national experts as well. And as you'll see in the brief, we really focused our work on 4 gold medal cities, meaning CityHealth has given those cities a gold medal for their restaurant grading programs. As you can see there, those cities are Boston, Columbus, New York City, and King County and Seattle. So we'll sort of be going through those now. Across the country, we have 12 of our 40 CityHealth cities have a gold medal in restaurant grading. 3 cities have a silver medal, and 25 cities have no medal. And so we're hoping that many of you on this webinar today might be interested in taking the next step when it comes to restaurant grading. Next slide, please. So I think if you were on this webinar, you probably have a lot of this background information already, but we did at least want to do some level setting and talk a bit about some of the benefits of restaurant grading. On the one hand, I think restaurant grading is really important for the public health impact side of things. It really has been shown to reduce foodborne illness rates in a variety of settings. You can see sort of the quote there we have from Los Angeles County about how they were able to see a decrease by about 13.1% in their foodborne hospitalizations. I'm hoping Melissa will share some of the great data we're seeing coming out from New York City on improved sanitary conditions following the restaurant grading program. There really is this great incentive by seeing a grade on the window or door. The food practices and food handling in the restaurants and other facilities does seem to improve. And so having that sort of core public health function for health departments by doing restaurant grading is one of the key benefits that we observed. The second sort of dual positive impact is that this really empowers people. and families to make informed decisions about where you're spending your money, and to include kind of restaurant safety and food safety in that analysis when you're choosing amongst restaurants. So sort of another kind of consumer transparency protection in addition to consumer protection. Next slide, please. And because this brief and this webinar is really for kind of city policymakers, health department officials who might be thinking about a restaurant grading program, what we learned from our interviews with cities that have already done their own programs, or national and local stakeholders, these were sort of the 5 questions and 5 key considerations that we heard across the board. So I'll touch on each of them very briefly, but authority is a key one. And by authority, I mean, does the city have the legal authority or the county to set up their own grading program? In the 4 cities we looked at, the city departments already had that authority themselves as part of their food safety and inspection authority. And so they were able to go to their Board of Health and make a recommendation that, we think we should add a grading program. And that was approved. In some of those cities, you had the city council sort of do something additional later or after the fact, or improve a small part of the grading program. But by and large, we heard from cities and counties that they could do this on their own, which was an important part of how these policies and programs got put into place. Capacity, I think, is a very obvious one. It's going to be a thread throughout sort of my slides today. I'm sure Kaylan and Melissa are going to speak about it as well. Restaurant grading programs do require additional capacity. And so that's something I think important to keep in mind as cities think about what they might want to do with these programs. Stakeholder engagement is also key. We heard that it's really important to engage the public, the restaurant industry, the trade associations, everyone far in advance to make sure folks fully understand the program and to allow rollout to happen in the way that it needs to happen and for the program to be successful. You'll also hear me talk about inspector standardization and, of course, political support. So having a champion for the grading program at the city council or in the mayor's office really helped in most cases for these 4 cities to get these programs off the ground. So those are just some key things to think in mind, and they sort of cross-cut around the rest of the information in the brief. Next slide, please. So one of our key findings was that data is really, really important. Data is king, as talking to many public health professionals, we all know. But some of the more interesting things that we found is that 3 of the 4 cities that we looked at actually looked at their historical inspection data before they even moved forward with the restaurant grading program. They used that data early to really help understand where operators would be already. If we rolled this out tomorrow, who would get an A or who would get a B? And having that information, I think, helped allay concerns, even by the restaurant industry of, big changes are coming and what is this going to mean for me? But by having that data early, folks could really say, no, we're doing well, or we think we could be doing better, but it was worth it sort of across the board for cities to be doing that data analysis early. We also saw a number of cities partner with academic institutions, and so King County had a very unique program where they did a randomized controlled trial with an academic at Stanford, and the goal there was really to test their inspector consistency. Again, I don't think I have to tell folks on this webinar how important some of that inspector standardization is, but they used a randomized control trial for peer review in the inspection process. And they found doing that when they would send inspectors out together, the inspectors disagreed about 60% of the time, but having the peer review process actually made that number go down. And King County sort of found that to be so important to their process and so valuable that they actually added peer review to their quality assurance process. When you ask them about this, a randomized control trial took a long time, and so I don't think they think every city needs to go down that road and do something so extensive before rolling out a restaurant grading program. But they found that it was really, really valuable to sort of work with an academic, think through some of these processes, and that information has actually been written up in the Stanford Law Review about how successful the peer review was for inspector consistency. So check that out if that's of interest to you. And the data you see here actually comes from a poll that New York City partnered with Baruch College to sort of see what, how popular, how successful has the restaurant grading program been. And I think those numbers on the screen there speak for themselves, that after 18 months, 91% of folks surveyed still really supported and appreciated the restaurant grading program. And last but not least, again, you all know data is king, but cities really did recommend kind of doing ongoing data analysis and measuring the impact that you needed to. New York City's been doing some great reports about how foodborne illness, salmonella infections have fallen over time as the restaurant grading program has been put into place. So if you don't have that data, it becomes harder to sort of make the case for why the program is successful and why it should stick around. And so cities kind of across the board thought data is really, really important here. Next slide. And I've mentioned inspector capacity and standardization a few times. Capacity is really important. That will not be a surprise to any of you on this webinar, but grading programs do require additional staff capacity. There's training that has to happen. Depending on how you set up the program, you might have inspectors needing to do 2, if not 3 re-inspections, which takes additional time out in the field. And then enforcement was sort of an interesting one. There was one city who thought, well, who hadn't really thought through the enforcement implications of, they understood their staff needs on training, on reinspection, but when it came time to actually, go around and make sure that restaurants were posting their grades after they had been given to them, that sort of enforcement side is not something they had been thinking about. And so that became sort of an unexpected burden to actually go and make sure that the grades were being posted. So that's just something to keep in mind too, as folks are thinking about this. Inspector standardization was absolutely a key best practice. Folks recommended at least rolling out inspector standardization before or with the restaurant grading program. We think it's in everyone's interest for these grades to be consistent and reliable, and inspector standardization has been one proven way to do that. And so that's something we heard of sort of across the country there. And then ongoing training is sort of needed even after the program is rolled out. It's not sort of a one-time thing. You've got to, continue to keep things moving forward and make sure your staff is well prepared to be out in the field doing the grading program. Next slide, please. So this is the fun part. Again, not surprising, but the grade design really, really matters. And it varies significantly across the country. We saw everything from letters, which is sort of the traditional ABC program, to emojis, to different colors, to lighthouses. The example there on your screen is the program used in Columbus, which is sort of color-coded. One thing that I think is interesting about these grade designs is, they can be really tailored to reflect local needs. And so King County, for instance, they did some research and they sort of learned that the ABC system didn't really speak as much as they wanted it to their immigrant communities in Seattle. And so they decided to instead go with sort of an emoji system, which is kind of people's faces and words like excellent or great, that I'll show you on the next slide. But that, being able to tailor how they want the grades to look and to be displayed, was very important to them. On the flip side, I did hear from a lot of stakeholders saying, there's a lot of different systems out there. You've got colors here and ABCs there and emojis here. And, what does that mean for consumer understanding? And is that confusing? And should we have more of a national or statewide system? And so, in the vein of things you should be considering or thinking about, that was certainly something that came up quite a bit. So kind of understanding what other cities are doing or what the state is doing on this could be really, really important to making sure that it's successful. Stakeholders want to give input on the grades. I don't think that is a surprise at all. And the grades themselves, how they look matters. For operators in particular, they're posting this in their front window. I remember hearing a story of, the department had gone through a bunch of work and the A they rolled out was big, bright, and red. And so the feedback to the department from the restaurant industry was like, even the A looks like a violation. I don't want to put that up in my restaurant. We've got to have some design elements. We've got to make this look like it's a good thing, especially if you're getting the A. So a lot of questions as you can imagine, and making sure that the appearance of the grades themselves matches, what all the stakeholders want or what's most appropriate. The other thing I heard a lot about was sort of a debate about what should go into the grade. Should it be the full inspection? Some folks really encouraged it to focus solely on sort of food handling and food safety practices. The idea that this grade is supposed to tell the person who's walking through the door whether the restaurant is clean and following all the best practices that it should be, versus, having some of the, floors, walls, ceilings types of inspection scores. And so I think there was a push, at least on the restaurant industry side, to say these grades should really only think about food handling rather than sort of the full spectrum of inspections. And so just a, a tension point that if you're thinking about rolling out a system like this, you might want to keep in mind. And then cities did really unique things to actually get public input on the grades and how they looked, which was really terrific. So a lot of cities used design firms to sort of work through what could a grade look like. Some posted them and got online voting. Which one do you like the best? What makes the most sense? Some used student researchers and focus groups, things like that. But cities did think that they needed to get that really some good public input at least before they kind of launched with these restaurant grades. It also helps do some of the public education that needs to be done before restaurant grading programs are put out into the field. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples. So you can see there on the left, this is sort of King County's emoji grading system. It's kind of emojis mixed with words, and this would actually get posted, in the window of a restaurant or other facility. And then on the right there, this is sort of an explanation of those color coding signs from the city of Columbus, and you can kind of see through there. So there's lots of different options. Both cities, both Seattle, King County, and Columbus get a gold medal from CityHealth. We recognize there's a need for a lot of flexibility to sort of make sure that the programs match what the local needs are. But these are the kinds of things that cities have been thinking about already. Next slide. You can hear this as a thread throughout, once again, but engaging stakeholders was critical. And I would also say that it was not my experience. These restaurant grading programs can be launched quickly. And so you can see, Boston moved the quickest, and it still took about 18 months or so. About 2 years in New York City, about 3 years in King County. Part of that, I think, was that randomized controlled trial on the peer review for inspectors that I mentioned. So maybe it didn't have to be that long, but that's how long the process took there. But to do it right, what I heard repeatedly is you want to have a lot of outreach. You want to have a lot of planning. You need to sit down with your regulated industry, with associations, with the operators, with other city officials whose work this might affect. Some cities developed their own advisory committees and boards, and some of those, were involved in the planning process, but are still in place today to sort of advise the health department about what should be done on restaurant grading programs. I will say that cities tried to engage sort of the general public rather than just kind of the industry, and there was pretty mixed success, I would say. Part of that, I think, is there's no sort of natural public constituency pushing for a restaurant grading program. It's very popular with the public. Consumers really, really like it. They like the idea that they could see the A, B, C on the window before they choose which restaurant to eat at, but there's no sort of natural affinity or natural advocacy group out pushing for this. And I think that was part of the challenge in actually getting good, strong engagement from the general public here. And then, the last sort of key lesson, and you can sort of see it from the quote there, before launching, you want to make sure you are actually speaking to all restaurant operators. So making sure you're doing outreach to diverse restaurant owners, to making sure you have materials available in multiple languages. To make this go smoothly, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure everyone in the city is on board. And I'm sure Melissa could talk about how to roll something like that out in a place like New York City with, the thousands of restaurants there. It takes a significant amount of push to make sure that everyone is fully prepared before the program launches. Next slide. And then this is sort of my last substantive slide. One area where there was significant variation was on PreInspection Policy. And you can sort of see, this graphic at the bottom is pulled from the brief itself. So the brief includes kind of a big comparison of the 4 study cities, but there's a ton of variation there. Generally speaking, the restaurant industry, from my conversations, wants as many opportunities for reinspection before a grade gets posted as possible. And that can range from 2 reinspections in Boston, to 1 reinspection in New York, that kind of thing. King County sort of said, we're not even gonna go there with reinspections. We're gonna sort of have an aggregate grade based on the most recent 4 inspections. So there's no, you're inspected once and then you go back and you have another opportunity. It's really based on sort of an average and a historical lens of how well that restaurant has done over time. And so, you know, lots of considerations there. I think that's an area where you really want to work with your industry and your colleagues. And I think the reinspection too, it raises a lot of questions, at least about the capacity that city officials have to do, you know, how many reinspections can you offer? Should you charge a fee for those reinspections because it is so much more capacity? Should you be doing less adversarial, you know, reinspections? Should you be offering, you know, the opportunity to go out and consult with a restaurant ahead of time so that they can get the best grade possible and have the best inspection possible? So this is one of those areas where there was sort of a lot more, not conflict, but a lot more debate and room for variation, because it's just one of those really important issues, I think, particularly to the industry. And next slide, please. So just some simple concluding thoughts, and then I will very happily turn things over to Kaylan. You all know this, food safety inspection really is sort of a core function for local health departments. This is something, you know, folks are going out every day and inspecting restaurants. Part of, I think, the benefit of restaurant grading that I heard from interviews is that it can really increase the department's visibility. Knowing that you're already doing that work and then being able to have that A or B or C, and even be able to tell, you know, your family and friends, that's what I do, that's what I work on. I help make sure you know where it's safe to eat or not. Can just kind of elevate the work that many local health departments are doing already and make it a lot more visible. I mentioned this already, restaurant grading is very, very popular. Consumers love it. You can even see kind of the quote on the left there from the restaurant industry, sort of knowing it is popular, that's true. But there isn't sort of this natural constituency to kind of push these policies across the finish line. And so in a lot of places, it's come directly from local health officials or, you know, an elected official who just gets really excited about this idea. And then, you know, again, I would just go to sort of the evidence base here. Cities that have done this, I think, really see value for having a restaurant grading program, both because of the benefits for public health that we already talked about, and because this is very much a core sort of consumer protection that the department is doing. So some food for thought for those of you who might be considering a restaurant grading program, and happy to take questions at the end, but we'll turn things over to Kaylan at NEHA. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie, for your presentation. Again, everyone, my name is Kaylan Celestin, and I work at the National Environmental Health Association. You'll hear me refer to that as NEHA. And I'm a project specialist there on assignment from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, working on food safety. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about just the background of NEHA for those folks that aren't aware, and then we have a key partnership with Dining Safety Alliance, so I'll discuss that. And then I'm going to let you know a little bit about what project we're currently working on at NEHA to address restaurant grading and restaurant inspection reporting, and then hopefully provide you with a few opportunities to learn more. Next slide, please. So the National Environmental Health Association, we're actually dynamic and growing. We have a membership of about 6,000 members across the EH field. We do provide training and resources for continuing education and resources just to help EH professionals. We publish the peer-reviewed Journal of Environmental Health, and we also host an annual education conference that's widely attended. Next slide, please. So NEHA actually began its pursuits to better understand the variability in restaurant inspection reporting by building a partnership with Dr. Harlan Steuven. He's the executive director and founder of Dining Safety Alliance. And just to tell you a little bit more about Dining Safety Alliance, it was founded to improve food safety by increasing awareness of foodborne illness and the formation of partnerships within the food industry. So NEHA has partnered with Dining Safety Alliance to study the variance in restaurant inspection scores. We really want to understand where and why there's variation in restaurant inspection scores across jurisdictions. The goal of this project is really to develop key relationships with interested jurisdictions to gain access to a compilation of food establishment inspection scores and essentially develop a comprehensive database of inspection reports across the nation to allow for comparisons that would be valuable. Next slide, please. So the first question that we really asked in pursuits of this project is, what is the need? So to determine this, we developed an online survey to distribute to jurisdictions. And this survey was distributed via NEHA's communication methods. We have an e-news that goes out to all 6,000 members. We also have several external partners and also our social media channels. The survey asked 7 questions for people to basically share their opinions on the standardization of restaurant inspection reporting. The survey was open for about 3 months, and within that time, we were able to help determine the need for this project to really take place. I will say that we did receive 73 responses from jurisdictions across the United States. And that was a limitation that we did recognize, knowing that there's over 3,000 jurisdictions that are responsible for regulating the retail food safety industry. Next slide, please. I just wanted to share with everyone briefly a couple of the responses that we received from participants in the survey that really helps to highlight the value in the work that we're doing and the desire from jurisdictions to improve the current food safety systems that are in place. One of the questions on the survey that was asked is, what do you think is the value in identifying variance in restaurant inspection scoring? Again, these are just a couple of the answers. Obviously, there were a lot more, but they really do highlight a few important categories, such as determining training needs, continuing studying the data and quality improvement, and hopefully encouraging a universal standard, as well as being able to target education efforts. And most impactful, I think, is to really help local counties understand whether or not they're below the norm, especially when it comes to enforcement actions or pushing voluntary closures. Next slide, please. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, what are some next steps that we're going to be doing with this project? And I will say that we are partnering with over 25 jurisdictions that have agreed to share their restaurant inspection history. Through that partnership, we'll be collecting once we collect the data, we'll be able to match that data to the 2017 US FDA Food Code. We'll be analyzing that data that's received and providing those cross-comparative analysis in the form of evaluation and reports to each jurisdiction. If at all you're interested in maybe filling out the survey and sharing your own opinions from your jurisdiction, or if you would just like to simply see the full survey, please feel free to check our project updates available online. That is a hyperlink, and I can also provide that in the chat box to the moderator, who can then share it with everyone. Next slide, please. And as I had mentioned, NEHA is hosting its 83rd Annual Education Conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and that'll be July 9th through the 12th. And the conference provides opportunities for environmental health training, education, networking, and advancement. And food safety is actually our largest track at the conference. And we have over 40 sessions on food safety this year. One of those sessions is on restaurant grading, where I will discuss in a lot more detail NEHA's project on studying the variance in restaurant inspection scoring. Next slide, please. And this does conclude my brief presentation, but if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out via email or in the chat box, and I'll be able to answer them at the end of the webinar. Next up, we do have Melissa Wong presenting, and I am going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melissa Wong, and I am here to talk to you about New York City's experience developing and launching the restaurant letter grading program. So I will say a lot of the evaluation work that we did in New York City was supported through grant funds, through the Environmental Health Specialist Network. So I just wanted to give that little bit of information before I get started. Let's see. So before I get into how we develop the program, I thought I'd give a little background on what New York City's restaurant scene looks like. It's a very robust restaurant scene. On any given day, there are approximately 24,000 restaurants operating, and it's estimated that residents eat out nearly 1 billion times a year in New York City. So before we launched restaurant grading in July 2010, we routinely inspected each restaurant at least once a year, and we issued monetary fines for violations cited at inspection. However, we found that monetary fines and the inspection schedule set up were insufficient to really drive improvement across the industry, with most restaurants still being cited with multiple public health hazards. Next slide. So that led us to a 2-year process to develop a restaurant letter grading program. So we developed the program through a very robust set of regular internal meetings to coordinate the many parts of our agency to kind of build up all the parts that we needed for restaurant grading. So that included our food safety inspection program, our general counsel's office, our intergovernmental affairs group, knowing that we'd have to engage elected officials and other stakeholders and city agencies, working on communications, not just to restaurant operators, but to the public. And in addition, we were getting a lot of press inquiries about this throughout the process. In addition, while building up the program, we knew we needed a lot of IT system updates and new software. In addition, since we knew that we would be getting a lot of new information in, we also recognized the need for data analysts. So that was just internally. We also engaged external stakeholders, including the restaurant industry. So there's a number of associations in New York City that are quite active. So we engaged them and kind of got their thoughts on what the process should look like and what the card should look like. So we took all that information and designed a program and developed a rollout plan as well. And that led to a health code change in which we proposed the new system. And through that process, the public, including industry stakeholders, were able to give feedback on the program. And then our Board of Health voted and passed that health code change, which allowed us to actually create rules for the system. And then in addition, there was another period in which the public could comment on our rules. So there was a lot of stakeholder engagement along the way when we were developing the program. And, you know, that was just the rules side. In addition, we had a lot of new staff that were starting right before the program rolled out, because we recognized with the new program design that we were going to be doing more inspections. So we needed new staff and we needed to train the current staff on the new system. So there was a lot of work that had to be done over the 2-year program development. Next slide. So the program launched in July 2010, and it established a system that created multiple incentives for restaurants to improve food safety and get an A grade. So by achieving that A grade, you generally have less frequent inspections. In addition, you receive no monetary penalty for sanitary violations. So we found that, next slide. We found that in New York City, we launched the program in July 2010, and we found that over time, we really did see improvement. So this slide shows a series of maps of New York City by neighborhood from our health department's environmental and health data portal for the percent of A grades by neighborhood from 2011 to 2018. So the darker colors represent a smaller percentage of A grades, and the lighter colors indicate neighborhoods with a higher percentage of A grades. So you can see over time, the map gets less red and more lighter yellow. And right now I can say that in New York City, we have approximately 94% of restaurants achieving an A grade. In addition, we also see that there have been improvements in individual violations as well. So, for example, evidence of mice, which is actually a very common violation in New York City, unfortunately, we saw a 40% decrease in citations of that violation. And in addition, we also saw improvements in operators holding food at proper temperatures is more likely to happen after grading compared to the year before grading. We also see more restaurants have a food safety supervisor trained on site, and they also are making structural changes to make sure that their operation is in better order. So for example, having proper hand washing facilities is cited less frequently now. Next slide. So in New York City, restaurant grading has really changed the landscape. You see the letter grades everywhere you go in the city, on the front doors of every single food service establishment. It's been so popular with New Yorkers, as you know, as was alluded to in an earlier slide, that it was actually asked that we expand the program to mobile food vending. So we, in December 2018, launched mobile food vending grading on all of our city's mobile food carts and trucks. So that's about, I would say, almost about 6,000 units. So right now we're in the process of rolling out that program. So you know, it's an incredibly popular program. Diners can look up the information on our website. And I can say in 2019 that our government website has received over 72,000 visits to look up restaurant grades. So we still think it's an incredibly important program, and people are using the information. Recognizing that people may not want to visit our website, we also make the actual data available on our city's open data portal for app developers to use if they want to, you know, incorporate that data on their websites. Or in addition, if a researcher wanted to do a study and look at our data. So that's just kind of a little bit of what we've seen almost 9 years later after launching the program. But I want to thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Melissa. We are now going to open up our question and answer session. I'm just going to remind you quickly how to answer a question. We got a couple as the slides were going forward throughout the presentation. So you can either click on the speech bubble to open the chat box and use the raise your hand feature to give us a notification. Or you can type your text into the chat box and press enter to send it. You can select to talk just to the panelists or to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your question. If you send it just to the panelists, I'll read your question out loud. Just a reminder to please tell us your name and affiliation as you ask your question. Okay, we have a few questions already. So the first one is from Marcel Elizondo, who says, you may have covered this, but how effective is a grading system if the establishment can keep applying for re-inspections until the desired grade is achieved?
So this is Melissa in New York City. I can't speak exactly to that scenario. Our system works a little bit differently than the other systems I think that were included in the CityHealth paper. New York City actually does a reinspection if the restaurant does not score an A grade on that first inspection. So it's not an optional thing, and you don't pay extra for it. It's based solely on the performance by that restaurant on the inspection. So you get basically the first inspection, and if you don't get an A, then we will definitely come back and do a reinspection. And at that time, then you will receive your letter grade.
And this is Katie at CityHealth too. I think your point is one that a lot of folks have sort of brought up, including folks who are critical of restaurant grading programs, of, you know, does that mean the grade doesn't convey the information we want it to convey if you're just able to sort of do re-inspections before the grade goes up? It is just one of those areas where I think stakeholders spend a lot of time. And so in New York, it sounds like they've found this balance that everyone agrees with. The balance is different in different cities, and I think that's something to certainly keep an eye on and pay attention to. There's also, what I also heard too is like questions of equity and fairness, and making sure that you know, these grades they do convey a lot of information to consumers. So making sure that your program is set up in a way that is about improving food safety rather than being punitive, I guess is how I wanted to sort of say that. But those are the types of considerations that certainly came up across the cities.
Okay, our next question is from Marianne Seifert, who is on the webinar today from the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. Marianne is curious about if the speakers could talk more about how to reach the general public, including immigrants.
Yeah, Melissa, do you want to start? Or I'm happy to chime in.
Sure. So is this, I guess this question is about reaching just kind of the, you know, not the restaurant operator population, but just anyone, I guess, that might see our letter grades. So I think, you know, initially when we rolled out the program, we did a lot of work to think about how people would engage with the grades. And we created information sheets in multiple languages for the public, and we had them on our website. In addition, we received a lot of press inquiries. So there was a lot of media attention when we launched restaurant grading back in 2010. So I think a lot of the public probably saw our information through articles and news media. And I would say that that's probably how the public has engaged with our information the most. In regards to food operators, we send information by mail. You know, we have information on our website. We translate our materials into, I would say, at least 8 to about 15 languages. And we really try to make the information available. And we also have language line services. So even on inspection, we can translate the information at that time if there's questions.
And this is Katie, that's very consistent, I think, with what we heard from other cities as well. Some other considerations that Melissa's comments are making me think of is, you know, making sure that outreach is happening sort of on off hour, even when you're doing the planning, you know, having sort of town halls in the mornings or at times when people could come rather than at night when people are on shifts. I think a lot of cities actually went into sort of, you know, more diverse neighborhoods, so holding town halls in Chinatown areas, that kind of thing, to make sure the information is really being targeted and is going as far as you want it to, but really trying to reach people where they are, including, you know, staff of restaurants as well as the owners themselves.
Okay, great. We've got our next question from Kevin Elock, who is from the Middletown Health Department. And his question is about the rating design and how to reduce confusion for consumers. He's curious about the example of the sign we showed during the presentation that showed the word okay, and whether consumers can readily understand the sign. Can one of our speakers speak to sort of what it took to design these signs and to ensure that they would be understood by consumers?
So I can take, I think the okay that you're referring to is one of the sort of emojis and words from the King County program. And so I can speak, I'm probably not going to get all the details right, but I do know that they used like student researchers who did focus group testing. They used a design firm, and then King County is one that actually had the public vote on which type of grading system, and I think even voted on some of these words, but they tried to sort of go through and make sure that diverse communities in particular could sort of understand what, you know, what each of these sort of signs signaled to folks. If I was put in a room, I don't know that I would have come up with these themselves and said, this is what a consumer is going to understand, but they did sort of do what sounded like a fairly extensive process to try to make sure that understanding was there.
This is Kaylan as well. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, this is Kaylan. I just wanted to piggyback off that. I think that one of the most important things when we talk about consumer confusion is that it can be specific to a particular jurisdiction. So in this case, that was what worked for that specific jurisdiction. I know that in our survey, something that NEHA found and Dining Safety Alliance found was that folks are confused and the public is confused. However, if we do implement a standardization across the nation in terms of grading, it just might not work for that particular population. And I think that that is something that CityHealth was addressing in their brief.
Okay. Our next question is from Brianna Adams. So she asks, from the very beginning, what types of programs would you recommend to ensure inspector standardization?
Is that one you want to try, or Melissa? Yeah.
Sure, I can speak a little bit about what we do in New York City. I think one of the things that we did from the start was engage with our data analysts. We actually, before we launched restaurant grading, we actually had all our information entered into a computer system so we could analyze that data. And we continued that after we launched restaurant grading, and we really engaged our data analysts and our teams to kind of work with the program doing the inspections to kind of make sure that they had the information that they needed to kind of on the fly, and as you know, as the program was rolling out, really evaluate kind of, you know, how things were going. You know, were violations being cited, you know, kind of in the same way across the board, or were there things that needed to kind of be readjusted in terms of training? And it's something that we found that we really needed to kind of continue even after the initial rollout. So we actually, you know, have a series of, you know, kind of things like kind of set in as a part of process for our staff to use to kind of be able to kind of identify areas for additional training, or even if like there's, for example, a violation that might be cited to an incorrect part of law, like we can correct that, you know, if it's something about the computer system itself. So I think there's a number of things that we kind of thought about as we're rolling out.
And this is
okay.
I'll be
our next question.
I'll just say one more thing on that, Liz. I'll be quickly out of my element on this, but I did hear a lot about the FDA sort of standardization protocol and the training program that they have, and mostly positive. And so that might be something for at least as an initial matter for the department to take a look at if that's something of interest. But yeah, standardization over and over again is what we heard. It's that consistency and reliability of the grades is really important.
Okay, our next question is from Tom Biles from Flower Mound, Texas. Melissa, how long do you wait between the routine inspection and the follow-up? And what keeps the follow-up from essentially becoming an announced inspection? Tom,
that is a great question. So we say that the reinspection, which is the follow-up inspection, can essentially occur 7 days after the routine inspection. So it can be any time after those 7 days. So we could come back on the 8th day, or we could come back 3 weeks later or a month. So we don't specify the time. Yes, the restaurant does know we are coming because they did not get the A grade. But we do leave it a little bit more open-ended, that they don't know exactly when we're coming. We do have kind of like ideas of when we try to get back, but we don't always stick to like, oh, it must be 2 weeks later. But I agree, it isn't truly an unannounced inspection, because they kind of know, like, if I clean up my act for the next X amount of time, I know they're coming. So it is something that kind of, isn't a perfect part of the program, but it was something that, we thought we needed to give them another chance before we gave them that grade.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Larry Figgs. Katie, how long before an operator can change his or her letter grade? Are operators charged a fee for reinspection?
Yeah, great question. So this varied significantly, at least in the cities that we looked at. So in Boston, and there, again, there's a sort of a big chart in the brief where you can kind of compare reinspection policies across the 4 cities that we looked at. So in Boston, for instance, you can have up to 2 reinspections before a grade gets posted, and sort of nothing goes up on the window before then. Your first reinspection is sort of automatic, and then the second one is optional and for a fee. And so that was sort of the compromise, or the policy that Boston wanted to put in place. You heard Melissa talk about how New York City does its program, and then King County, again, doesn't have even these questions about reinspection, because they sort of look back at the last 4 inspections and use historical data. Columbus doesn't have a fee for reinspection, that kind of thing. And I just sort of say that because there really is a lot of variation out there. And I think if folks are really interested in digging in on these questions, you can certainly reach out to Liz, to Kaylan. I think we've got a lot of sense of kind of what cities are doing across the country, and based on what you're interested in, we might be able to connect you with policymakers in other cities who you could talk to about this. Hear more about their best practices and what they recommend, and maybe what they would do differently if they had the chance, that kind of thing.
This is Liz. I also want to say that in Katie's report, which is on our website, there's a really great table that she inserted showing how each city handles that. And if you go to cityhealth.org, you will see the report right at the top of the first page. There's a link to it, that home page. Okay, our next question is from Kevin Elock from the Middletown Health Department. Melissa, how are grades determined in New York City, and are violations assigned a weighted score?
Yes, so that's a great question as well. So our violations do have, I guess, a weighted score. We actually refer to them as condition levels. So you can have one violation that has multiple condition levels that has a different point value, which contributes to the score that determines the grade. So for example, having a food out of temperature, you could have one food out of temperature versus a whole refrigerator that is out of temperature. So that would contribute differently to what the grade would be. So we definitely take severity of the violation into account when kind of considering the grades. And the violations, I guess I should back up, each violation has a point value, and that point value determines the score, which determines the grade.
Okay, great. We're going to take one last question because we're almost out of time. This one is from Serena Josel. Katie, I am wondering what specific rating systems meet CityHealth's criteria for a policy medal. Does it have to include an A, B, or C, or can the rating system just say pass or fail?
Thank you, Serena, for that question. So we have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we give out medals for restaurant grading programs. As you can see, sort of all 4 of the cities we've been talking about today, so Boston, New York City, King County, and Columbus, all of those get a gold medal from CityHealth. And Columbus uses colors and King County uses emojis. So there really is a lot of variation. We don't specify, having to have an ABC or something like that. We do, however, sort of specify that the grading program shouldn't just be pass-fail. I think we've heard best practices from the experts out in the field that having a binary system where you've got a good inspection or not is actually not enough information for consumers to really understand whether the restaurant is sort of following best practices and things like that. So any kind of sort of non-binary restaurant grading program, preferably that posts that grade in the window where someone can see it before they even enter the restaurant, is what would get a gold medal from CityHealth. Great question. And what a way to end the webinar.
Yeah. Okay, we want to thank our speakers so much for participating today. We want to thank everyone who is on the line, and especially those of you who asked really great questions about this important policy issue. CityHealth wants to keep in touch with leaders like you. We're going to be releasing other briefs like this and reports and holding events over the next year. So we would love for you to join our list and follow us on Twitter and Facebook so that you get all of those notifications from us and can keep engaging with CityHealth. So I invite you to visit cityhealth.org/join-us to receive updates from us. We're always looking to partner with cities and help advance great policies that are evidence-based. If you would like to make progress on your medal status before we release our next report, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have any additional questions about this report, please feel free to contact me at liz@cityhealth.org. My phone number is also up on the screen. Thanks again so much for joining us, and we will talk to you on our next policymaker webinar. All right, bye-bye.